Today's episode is with Kayra Otaner.
Detecting the issues as early as possible. I mean, how are you going to remediate those issues? Is it manual? Is it automated? How can you be smart enough? And also, there is no one size fits all approach. If you're a small organization, you try to upskill your dev to get involved with more automation of things in the dev side. The breaking builds with CI/CD pipelines or toll gating is a very common thing. You want them to be called team of how. You want to show how easy it is to implement these. Anyone below the median should be automatically toll gated. The culture is going to eat all the strategy, all the best practices that you bring from all other places. That makes things easier. That starts with having daily meetings or weekly meetings or on a regular cadence meeting. This is not going to work in corporate America, especially in startups. It's not going to work because nothing is rocket science anymore. I mean, I don't want to underestimate the importance of the things that we do. There is 4 C's of cloud native security. You want to follow that 4 C, there are 4 layers.
Hi everyone, this is Purushottam and thanks for tuning into Scale to Zero podcast. Today's episode is with Kayra Otaner. He has over 20 years of experience in PCI SOX compliant work in both New York and Wall Street. Currently, he's a director of DevSecOps at Roche. Previously, he has worked at ADP, WPP, and FICO. He's a trusted DevOps and SecOps advisor. He frequently speaks at international DevOps and SecOps events since 2016. Recently, he presented at RSA on implementing zero trust with a dedicated DevSecOps pipeline. Prior to that, he has also presented at KubeCon, Detroit, DevSecOps Days, Washington, D.C., Moscow, Lithuania, and Turkey. He has a unique perspective and he has launched DevSecOps teams at ADP and also at Roche. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast, Kayra. For our audience, do you want to briefly share about your journey?
Yeah, thank you for having me on this podcast. My journey has become, I have been in Linux and open source ecosystem for over, I guess, close to 25 years now. Started as a developer and then quickly switched to systems admin side, and then with the emergence of all the compliance and PCI, which was launched in 2005, and SOX compliance, I guess around 2008 or 7 after the Enron thing. I moved to security space, and as with everything in IT, we change shapes, we coin new terms, but we also improve the process along the way. So I see that very agile way of doing security. I've seen the manual, very mundane, paperwork-driven way of doing stuff to evolve into the DevSecOps way, and I start working on this space. I would say for last next 6-7 years, and the DevSecOps has been the blood of everything that we do. There was not enough automation and tooling place. Now with the all tools that is out there, like chat GPTs and the infrastructure as a code, most things that we've imagined before us are now currently available to us.
And you have you have a lot of experience on this field, and I'm interested to learn from your experience. Right before we start, I generally ask this question to all of our guests. And I get different answers, unique answers as well. So I'm curious, what does a day in your life look like today?
So I'm in a unique and different position than most other people in. I work for a company in Europe, and I'm in East Coast, in New York area. And my day starts very, very early than most other folks are. And I have a lot of meetings with the European teams and also the West Coast team. So my day is very, very, different than regular DevSecOps people's way of doing things. We are in the process of building a world-class team for this large organization. Ultimately, we are mentoring, coaching a lot of product teams within the organization to show them the best or better way of doing stuff. So, providing governance, guidance, coaching, mentoring is, I guess, that's one thing that every DevSecOps architect has to do. And my day, evolves around that thing primarily.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. For today's episode, we'll talk about few topics, but let's start with DevSecOps. So, as you have been in the industry for some time, you have seen many trends, right? Earlier, we did not even have DevOps. Now then we got into DevOps patterns, and then security was never part of that. So then, which led to the DevSecOps move, and the concept behind it is all about like finding and addressing security issues as soon as possible in the development cycle. With that being said, what's your take on the transition? Like, how is the transition going on right now?
I guess you mentioned one important thing: the detection, detecting the issues as early as possible. I mean, as you know, the shift left is almost like a synonymous with the DevSecOps. When you see DevSecOps blogs, they always mention shift left, and that almost always means that you have to do early detection. But what we are seeing, the evolution is continuing. With everything else, that the expanding detection capabilities was getting us into the next phase of doing stuff, meaning prevention and remediation. So I'm seeing huge step towards the auto remediation capabilities, a huge step towards like prevention capabilities that wasn't part of the DevSecOps circles. And as a security practitioner who has been in this space for 15 years, we keep constantly firefighting, meaning detecting things, not able to prevent them, not able to remediate those. Say, take the Log4j as an example. I have the sticker on my, desk that I've been showing to a lot of people in my calls because that's the unique case that everyone knows about. Guess what? You know that you have like 10,000 instances of Log4j all around in your infrastructure. What's going to happen? How are you going to remediate those issues? Is it manual? Is it automated? How can you be smart about those type of incidents that happens? I guess the
Mhm.
evolution towards auto remediation and what we call them is prevention technologies or preventative controls in the compliance space are gaining more and more importance. DevSecOps was evolved from the DevOps, but it was coining two terms: DevOps plus SecOps. They were like two separate disciplines or two separate approaches. Now we are seeing with the prevention things, DevSecOps really becoming real DevSecOps, fusing the
Mhm.
dev to sec to ops to dev with all this complete loop. I guess that's very exciting times, for any professional, security profession to be involved with any DevSecOps initiative.
Makes sense. So now the a follow-up question to that is, when let's say an organization did not have DevSecOps practices in place, they want to get into DevSecOps. What kind of challenges they might face, and how can they address them?
All right. So there are two approaches that typically we see in the industry, and also there's no one size fits all approach. If you're a small organization, you try to upskill your dev people.
Hmm.
Which, I mean, if you think about a pyramid, you have like 10 developers. For 10 developers, you have like five ops members, and for five ops members, you have one security personnel. So it only makes sense to upskill the dev to do more
Hmm.
security, to get them more involved with implementing security or codifying security into their infrastructure or into their way of things, doing
Hmm.
things. So it is essentially what we call security as code. But this is an approach that is very common, and I call this an anti-paradigm because it results in a hybrid situation that you are not neither DevOps or DevSecOps. What I'm trying to do in large organizations, which is much more easier to implement if you have a lot more resources than small startups has, we do upskill security people to do more development, meaning asking security practitioners, which is top of the pyramid in terms of the number of individuals that you have in your team, to get involved with more automation of things in the dev side, meaning getting pre-commit hooks, pre-push hooks implemented, getting security scanning implemented on behalf of the dev teams, and not ask them to integrate those security checks into CI/CD, but have a dedicated team to operate the security checks on a separate pipeline, which is the was the title of my talk that I presented in RSA conference like 6 months ago in April 2023, implementing zero trust pipeline, zero trust DevSecOps pipeline for the large organizations. So these two approaches are valid depending on the size of organization, especially after seeing in big organizations like the ones that was mentioned. It is the small startup approach rarely works for large organizations. I can easily say that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And one of the things that you highlighted was like pre-commit hooks or having a separate pipeline for your security findings, right? That that matches with like something we heard from Matt, who was in our earlier episode. He was also talking about that you should not just block the rollout of a critical feature just because there is a security issue, but maybe work with the team so that you can do a fast follow up and get those resolved sooner than getting like sitting the item sitting in the backlog for longer duration. Another thing that I liked about is you mentioned about shift left, right? And a lot of organizations are facing challenges on that front because you have to incorporate security at the earlier stages. So, how can organizations find that balance that they shift left, incorporate security earlier, but at the same time doesn't affect the speed of the deliverables?
All right, so a very good question. I mean, it's very common that when we talk about security, immediately in people's minds becomes as a thing that is going to slow them down, right? It is
Yeah.
always a speed bump. It's always like a
Hmm.
speed limit that you can't go faster than this. And the reason for that is, the security people are conscious of all the risks that is out there, and we can see the firsthand all the risks that are being executed by the attackers or adversaries, against the infrastructure that we are trying to defend or protect. Developers are not on their side. They can't see the first time, they can't witness that effect firsthand. So the breaking builds with CI/CD pipelines or toll gating is a very common thing that kind of slows down the adoption of DevSecOps because you are practically asking developers to own something that is going to slow them down or prevent them from moving faster. Hence, the shift left
Hmm.
in large organizations that you want to have a dedicated team that does it for them without asking them to own that piece. And also, what we try to say is we don't want the security people, especially the DevSecOps people, to not be called team of no. We want them to be called team of how. We want to show how easy it is to implement these and also supplement their decisions before they get stuff deployed to production, but not block them. And it sounds easier to do this without toll gating, but there are buckets that we typically design. There are tier one, tier two, tier three applications or product teams. For tier one
Hmm.
teams, we want to do toll gating because they are already in good shape because of the threat modeling that we have done, because of so many other things that they've demonstrated to us. We don't want to toll gate them. We want to give them the rating between 1 and 10. Oh, you guys, your build that you just finished building, CI, part of your CI, looks 7 out of 10. So we don't want to do anything. There are teams that are high risk because of the business criticality, because of the sensitive data that they're handling, because of the monetary volume that they are managing. We want them to be toll gated or prevent, have all the eyes on them, having 4 eyes on everything that they have. That has to be toll gated. So it's not a blank thing that executes that gets applied across all space. And also there is this third bucket, which is very common. So once you have like a somewhat meaningful metrics defined in your organization to measure the quality of the coding or application development, anyone
Hmm.
below the average should be automatically toll gated. Anyone below the median should be automatically toll gated. It's not a blank statement, so that it can be implemented in varying degrees or different ways. But the maturity
Hmm.
of the or security maturity of the team plays a critical role, and there are a lot of good ways to measure that. Like how many developers you have, how many vulnerabilities you have, what is your vulnerability per developer ratio? Are you beyond the average accepted thing for the organization or
Hmm.
below that average? So the toll gating, if it's a blank thing, you are going to end up having a lot of headwind and friction, which is not something that no
Yeah.
one likes. On this side, we don't like the other side, and developers typically they don't like it neither. But coming up with common sense, implementing common sense security policies that are aware of the risks is the way to go.
Yeah, I loved how you started, right? Like, generally, security teams are seen as roadblocks, right? It's like the way you highlighted that security teams should not be looked at as a team of no, but rather teams of how. Like, how can they enable you to become more secure? So that sort of takes the conversation towards like culture, right? Because most of the organizations have some sort of culture, and if you have DevSecOps mindset, then you know that yeah, security is important. You'll start doing it from earlier in the pipeline rather than later as part of the SDLC process. So Any tips that you have for organizations to ensure that they have the right culture in place?
You
uh,
know what? This can turn into a very, very open and frank and sincere group therapy session very easily because that's our stress point. There is this saying, I remember hearing this a while ago, and I heard it like a couple of months ago again. Culture eats strategy and transformation for lunch or for breakfast. So if you're in a culture that is already well established in this organization, small or large organization, or all or only one, the culture is going to eat all the strategy, all the best practices that you bring from all other places, all the high level influence that you might try to bring into your organization. That's going to be erased as a breakfast or lunch. So the culture
mhm,
is very important, and it is unfortunately, it takes a while. I mean, in cultural transformation or any DevSecOps adoption for small or large organization, going slow is smooth. When you
mhm,
go smooth, smooth is fast. So it's contradictory. You want to go slow. You want to start having a lot of open, frank, sincere, transparent organization, events within the organization, and start having some sort of influence sphere created around the things that you can control. That expand your influence sphere towards the areas that you can't typically enforce anything. So that's
mhm,
a slow process. It's a human psyche, human nature that we kind of reject the things that are new, right? In human life,
mhm,
you have numerous examples. Security is the one that is easier to reject because it's always going to slow you down, strictly speaking.
mhm,
But explaining the risks, making sure everyone is part of the same team, on the same ship, and also explaining that if we don't do this, we will fall behind on our bonuses, we will fall behind on our KPIs. That is going to affect global everything, and also seeing a lot of bad news. That's I don't want to give any specific examples, but there are like every day. Even yesterday was a bad news on how companies lost their MFA tokens and whatnot through the Git leak credentials. It's always happening. Very
mhm.
easy, low hanging fruit type of stuff are killing us. It is very easy.
Right.
You just have to be conscious about the things that is controllable very easily. It's like learning how to drive. You have to learn while your parents are sitting right next to you when you're 16 and 18. You have to be driving with them for a while, and then gradually become a driver license. Get the driver license. So that's the intention. You move slow, and repetition is the
Mhm.
key.
Makes sense. So there are two aspects, right, on the culture. There, as you highlighted, one is, let's say, as an organization, you have a culture, you're following it. How can security teams work more closely with the DevOps team, a dev team, or operations team? So whether it's like having a security champion or whether having brown bag lunches, what have you seen that has worked to build relationship between security and, let's say, product or engineering side?
I mean, it is one part, one team approach. It's not
Mhm,
multiple teams. There might be some organizational boundaries. There might be some organizational boundaries that involves the HR hierarchy, like you report to X, the other team reports to Y. The CISO and CTO, all whole organization structure. But if you essentially focus on you becoming the part of the same team or acting as if
mhm,
you're in the same team, that makes things easier. That starts with having daily meetings or weekly meetings or on a regular cadence meetings in any cadence is very critical. And also having very open show and tells, brown bag sessions, lightning talks, sometimes like quarterly or monthly is very very effective that we have seen. The transformation and showing things to be done, we call them dojos. Doing show and tells in the way that you execute those steps and showing that it's very
mhm,
easy because I never learned that it's that easy. Showing them is easy as like some copying pasting some snippets and putting them into pipelines or some other places is going to make the transformation a lot easier and smoother. So it's not you're always sending them an email like saying that this has to be done or can you do this when you let me know. This is not going to work in corporate America, especially in startups. It's not going to work because people have a lot of reasons to get busy with some other stuff that is not security related.
makes sense. I love the idea of like lightning talks and the dojos, right? Like doing it together versus just training and just training your team, rather like doing like hands-on workshops where you can show that how easily they can make improvements
I
and
mean,
then incorporate those.
nothing is rocket science anymore. I mean, I don't want to underestimate the importance of the things that we do, but once you start working on this stuff, it's not that complicated. And Yeah, I just want to reference back to the thing that I said. We don't want to be the team of no. We want to be the team of how. How do you demonstrate that you have the know-how, you have the how skills? That's why you have to organize these dojo type events that are periodical and recurring on a cadence, that everyone knows that you have a nice, cool thing to show that is going to make everyone, this one team, benefit from. So that's
Hmm.
once they realize that it's not conflicting, we are building a collaboration and we are consolidating a lot of effort together. Building
Hmm.
coalitions is what we call is very, very important. The most easy way of doing things is having brown bag sessions.
Yeah, makes sense. So I want to talk slightly about cloud now. Uh, I'm pretty sure you, like at Roche, must be working with major cloud providers. And when it comes to cloud, there is a shared responsibility model, right? Sometimes we assume that cloud providers take care of security for things which ideally we should also take care of. We should take care of it. So, how do you see organizations who have recently moved or are moving to cloud think about security in a cloud native environment?
In general, I'm not talking about anything specific to the employees that I'm currently associated with. In general, lift and shift approach is what we define the migration towards the cloud infrastructures, right? That rarely works. And here's why. The
Mhm.
benefit of having stuff running in the cloud is not just copying, pasting stuff in the way that it's executed. You want to get the benefit from the proper compartmentalization of things, proper containment of things. That's really, the only meaningful way of putting stuff into cloud is to get benefit from the containers and the consolidation things, that the infrastructure that they're providing. So, and you might be aware of this. Most audience, most viewers of this podcast, we're going to also be aware of it. There is 4 C's of cloud native security. You want to follow that 4C. There are 4 layers in cloud security journey, cloud native security journey, that has to be protected individually. That is cloud infrastructure, cluster infrastructure, container itself, and the code. So if you pivot that 4 level thing towards the left, you're just going to see stuff from left. The code is on the left. Container is right up after the code infrastructure. Cluster, all the IAMs and RBACs, etc. They all have to be carefully designed, because so many of those mechanics that are in that cloud native infrastructure cannot be mapped to the old pet VM world of doing stuff, that you might be using virtualized infrastructure or like on-prem infrastructure with so many things that are deeply buried under your OS level, that has to be decoupled completely from it, and then let them manage by the control plane or CRDs inside the clearance cluster. So it's a whole new journey. And I see that shift and left type of operations are typically opening up Pandora's box, because the vulnerabilities that you might have on your pet ecosystem or on-prem ecosystem
Now is
are
on cloud.
visible and not unmanageable very quickly in the cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So, a follow up question to that is, and you touched upon this earlier as well, around automation, especially when there is a digital transformation happening, an organization is moving to cloud, they either do not spend a lot of time setting up the automation, and again, not just for deploying the workloads but also from a security perspective. What, like, according to you, what role does automation play when it comes to security in cloud native environment? Like, does DevSecOps work?
Yes, I presented a couple of days ago in an internal event, and I called this DevSecOps is codifying security. If you look at from very high level, DevOps is codifying your infrastructure, right? All the Ansibles, Puppets, Terraforms, YAML files, or even Jenkins pipelines is codifying one way or another your infrastructure. If you are not
Mhm.
codifying your security tooling into your infrastructure, that's not DevSecOps, right? So codifying infrastructure and codifying ops infrastructure and codifying security has to go hand in hand in order to have full-blown DevSecOps, you know, infinity tool. So
Mhm.
automation is key, and automation was not possible to a certain degree till like 5 years ago. I mean, now we can talk about policies written in policy as a code languages like Rigo or Checo or some other languages. All that, like we
Mhm.
know, features built into the Kubernetes control plane. So all these things that wasn't possible before. But the biggest problem that I'm seeing that's happening right now is we are asking developers to write the policy as code or security as code for their own stuff. That's a maker checker problem. You can't ask people to check if they are complying with the policy. That policy as code and security as code to a certain degree has to be written by another entity with different organization boundaries applied to them because of the human nature, the maker checker problem. So when we try to develop DevSecOps in a small scale startup environment, we ask a lot of that stuff, policy as code, Rego, hey, you own it, you build it, you integrate with CI/CD. That's not how it works, unfortunately. Security has to be part of every day-to-day activities, but the ownership and execution of those has to be different. That's segregation of duties. We call that in SACS compliance, or maker checker problem in everyday life. So that automation has to be owned by dedicated security folks. We call them DevSecOps architects in large organizations. Has to be able to write the code and automation for security as code implementation and policy as code implementation to the level that it's checking the code that is living in synergy and harmony with the CI/CD operation that is already owned and executed by the dev/DevOps teams.
Makes sense. I want to follow up with one of the things that you highlighted earlier, right? Like when it comes to cloud, you have to look at the 4 Cs: code, container, cluster, cloud. And as part of the shift left, a lot of focus is being paid to to the code world.
Yes.
And when it comes to code, nowadays there is a lot of adoption of open source software. I think there was a recent study which showed that about 82% of the code written by enterprises code written by enterprises. Out of that, 82% of the code is open source, like using some external library, and that sort of makes you vulnerable to like supply chain security, like the attacks that happen to, let's say, SolarWinds or Twilio or PyPy. So from a security perspective, how do you look at this, like code being one of the key aspects, using open source software making you vulnerable to, let's say, supply chain security? How do you look at it?
So when you look at the raw number of CVs, raw number of issues, and their CVSS attached scoring, it's very easy to get very depressed very quickly, right? The number of CVs on average in 2023 is around 77. There are 77 CVs disclosed every freaking day, right? So ultimately what happens is it's not sustainable, it's not manageable. So we cannot fight against that volume of velocity of CVs coming towards us. And with every automation that you might put in place, it's not easy. And the reason why it's not easy is that, we assume that every CV is exploitable. Every CV is exploitable under special circumstances. So the rating of those CVEs is being shifted towards what we call EPSS, exploitability prediction scoring system driven data, that is machine learning driven using the KEV, which is CISA's non-exploited vulnerability list that just passed 1,000 announced CVs yesterday or 2 days ago, or last week actually. So these data, once it comes together, it kind of gives us proper tooling to do the prioritization, right? So the CV fighting or vulnerability fighting becomes much more meaningful and executable. So the automation that we are putting in place is focusing on that. Properly prioritize CVs to make the development DevSecOps scalable. Without the proper prioritizations in place, software supply chain issues with the whether it's open source or proprietary, coming from big OS vendors like Microsoft, Red Hat, or other ones, it is not manageable. You have to take into the EPSS like actionable data into consideration. Otherwise, software supply chain, especially the ones that are out there, that has been out there for like long period of time, is not easy. And also one thing that I should mention, we kind of briefly touched on that a couple of minutes ago. The reason why we are moving to cloud is not, I should say, the reason why we are moving to cloud native security is to get benefit from the containerization. So if you have properly contained applications that is ephemeral and immutable, the containers by design are like that. then you minimize the risk. The risk is still there, but you minimize the risk with common sense policies. The biggest gain that I see in that 4C is the containerization space. Having the containers properly hardened, we use
Mm-hmm.
cloud native build packs, we have used distroless images or very properly hardened images. That is minimizing the risk that we ultimately have to inherit from the open source community, because we cannot go back and fix log4j on
Mm-hmm.
December 4th. That was the day that was disclosed. That the patch was available, but there was multiple attempts, to fix it really. So you cannot really rely on that. If you have a properly containerized environment, properly hardened, foreseed cloud native operation, the open source software supply chain issues are losing its emphasis or importance, because in terms of the risk or governance and risk and compliance perspective.
I feel that we should have a separate episode altogether on the four C's of cloud
We
and how
can.
you can secure those areas. But I'm loving it. Like especially when you highlighted about like the distroless hardened images, using those for your containers,
Yep.
or like doing instead of using CVSS score, maybe focus on EPSS, because that shows whether those are exploitable or not. If it is not exploitable, even though it is critical, it should not be the highest priority, right? Because developers cannot work on 100 critical and high in a sprint. They have to focus on few, because they also have to deliver some business requirements.
Correct.
So that brings me to the next question, which is around the landscape, right? How has this landscape changed? So you have been in the industry for a while. You have seen the DevOps practices, DevSecOps, now cloud native security, using DevSecOps in cloud native security. How has the landscape changed?
I mean, assume that hypothetically speaking, you are in an environment that you manage to detect all the
Mm-hmm.
issues that is deeply buried in your products, infrastructure, whole nine yards. So what's next? Instead of assuming that you had 1,000 vulnerabilities or 1,000 issues that you need to fix, now you realize the complete picture has 10,000 weaknesses and vulnerabilities. What's next? What are you going to do? That's the landscape, the direction that I see that a lot of vendors are moving towards. That is, detection is already kind of 90% reliably executable with the right tool, right mindset, right approach. The auto
Mm-hmm.
remediation is the space that is everything is going to get bigger. Right now, roughly speaking, roughly less than 10% of the things can be auto remediated. I'm going to give you a couple vendor names. There's Open Rewrite Initiative. Moderna is one vendor that I know that's really doing good stuff on their front. There are a couple other vendors that are doing recipes to answer to those couple common issues that is widely seen in either Java language or like Python or some other languages or frameworks. So the auto remediation is going to be from less than 5% today, going to be like 20-30%, hopefully within 3 years, because the more detection we have, the more auto remediation needs we are going to end up having. And then what's next?
Mm-hmm.
You have auto remediation and whatnot. What's next after auto remediation? 5 years from now, we are going to start talking about prevention, because we will going to detect very quickly and auto remediate quickly, but that's not proper way of doing things. The humans are doing things better and better. So we're going to start focusing on prevention. That's when the cloud native build packs and proper containerization and some other stuff comes in place. So I recommend that any DevSecOps practitioner, that's what I do, right, for all these global organizations. Major three tracks. Expand your detection capabilities fully, to the fully. That's not easy to get to 100%, but you can get to 97%. Start auto
Mm-hmm.
remediation programs that is starting at very minimum, like 3 to 5% of things that can be automated, but it's going to slowly go up. And start your third track, which is prevention. Without these three pillars, DevSecOps is not DevSecOps. It's just a name. It's a nice coin term that gives a lot of good emotions, a lot of good feelings to a lot of good people, but it's not applicable. So you have to have those three pillars almost simultaneously executed. So you lift the scale of your organization, you lift the security maturity of your infrastructure or your organization to the better places.
I totally agree on like every at every time there is a marketing hyped word, right? Like Today it's Gen AI. Earlier it was blockchain. So similarly, even in security, at one point we were talking about detection, like show me what vulnerabilities are there. Now we have slowly moved to remediation. So I love how you mapped it to a landscape, right? Like how the security landscape is evolving. Any emerging trends or technologies that you are noticing which folks, our listeners or our audience should be careful about or should be interested to learn about?
I mean, ChatGPT or GPTs in general, GPT-3. I've been following GPT-3, GPT space for since GPT 3.0, which was 3-4 years ago. 3.5, 4.0, all these things are getting things done very easily. And this plays, GPT technology or AI plays into the auto remediation space, but not typically in the prevention space. The auto remediation and detection can benefit from all this stuff. The prevention is always strategical thinking and knowing what's going to come next. So
Mhm.
I recommend experimenting with all the nice tools out there, but not rely on them 100%. But 80% of the time they are reliable. And start implementing them as early as possible. As a matter of fact, a lot of large organizations are doing pilots with Copilot and Copilot X or some other tools out there.
Yeah, makes sense. And you're spot on the, like using LLMs and all of that to enable your engineering or dev teams to remediate issues that increases their productivity overall as well, right? So makes a lot of sense, and that's a great way to end the security questions for this episode. Thank you so much, Kayra, for the insightful conversation. Here are a few important points which stood out for me. The first one is organizational alignment is the most important factor for security roadmap. Pro tip: when speaking with business, security teams should use business language rather than technical language. The second part is uh, build a one team culture, like brown bags, lightning talks, dojos, etc. are great ways to collaborate with business or engineering or product teams to build the relationship, show the value and the impact of security function to other parts of the organization. The third one is when it comes to cloud migration, lift and shift doesn't work. Follow cloud best practices from a packaging and containerization perspective, and focus on the four C's like code, container, cluster, and cloud from a security perspective. Thank you. We also have a section which highlights on rating security practices. The way it works is I'll share a practice, and you need to rate from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, and you can add context also why you rated it as 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or something like that.
Cool.
Uh, So let me start with the first one. DevOps practices are needed to move fast and to deploy code to production. Security is not my most like highest priority right now, so I'll do it in the next sprint.
Uh, you want me to rate this rate? Statements. It's not less. It's not more than 2. And there might be some reasons, why this statement might be valid, but DevSecOps, the way that we define is software safer sooner. So DevOps is software sooner. DevSecOps is software safer sooner, quicker and safer approach. So this statement should only get like between 1 and 5, 2, very close to being worse.
Okay,
I agree.
all right. The next practice that I want to talk about is continuous integration is a must for DevSecOps practices. Security architecture review is performed on a regular basis.
I mean, continuous integration is not a security practice by design. It's a DevOps practice. Continuous integration should not include security in a large organization in a properly. It should be part of another pipeline. That's the way to go in zero trust measure model in advanced level implementation. Um, Ultimately, you want the people to focus on things, on the on their depending on their unique needs. So a small organization might implement that in the same CI phase,
Mm-hmm.
but the North Star, the Nirvana point, should be always like having that decoupled, and people should be aware of that. And I say that statement, having the security in CI is like 3 between 1 and 5, not more
Mm-hmm.
than. I'm very conservative.
Okay, that's fair. The last one that I want to talk about is use of strong passwords that contain mix of uppercase, lowercase, letters, numbers, symbols, and changing them frequently to avoid reuse of same passwords.
I mean, the way that we design passwords are for humans. Um, Secrets are for machines or services, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are talking about passwords for humans, it should always be accompanied by MFA, and even like some of the advanced passwordless approaches, right? MFA is a must-have, and
Mm-hmm.
most people like me. I have been in this space, for like 20 years that I had to manage various passwords for various things. I use password managers. I use password managers that generates like 40 character long, uppercase, lowercase, digits, symbols, etc. That's not easy to guess. It's not easy to brute force. But ultimately, my password manager is protected by a lot of things, including MFA. So the importance of having long passwords from the security developer perspective, yes, we should anticipate and enforce. I would say minimum 16 digit, 16 character long alphanumeric password, so that we ask people to use password managers with MFA. Without MFA, password managers is not a good idea.
Makes sense because you have one sort of like database which is not secure, right? You just have a password to access your database. Then once you have access to the database, then you can go to any service and you have
Certain
access to
things,
the kingdom.
I have a user in database, assume that's I'm a developer, that I have a user, then I have a password for that database. And my password is kept in my password manager somewhere that I have to go through
Mm-hmm.
MFA authentication. So I kind of add additional layer to that on top if I fully properly
Right,
implement it.
right. Makes a lot of sense, and that's a great way to end the episode as well. Thank you so much, Kara, for joining. It was
Thank you.
lovely to speak with you
It
on
was a very nice conversation.
multiple topics. Yeah.
Nice to be here. Thank
Uh,
you.
Thank you. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have learned something new. If you have any questions around security, share those at scale20.com and we'll get those answered by an expert in the security space. See you in the next episode. Thank you.